Hello, everybody, and welcome to Goho from Home, this week's edition. We're going to be talking about leadership and leading in times of change, which obviously is very apt right now. I'm Stacey Rebecca Carlton. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Goho, and I'm joined today by Chris Naylor, the Chief Executive of London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. Unfortunately, you can't see him. You can see a little tiny picture of him speaking on stage, but the camera's not working, I'm afraid. And Vivian Wong, who's the co-founder of Little Moon's Mochi, which are really delicious. If you haven't tried them yet, you should try them out. So as you know, thanks for tuning in again. And as you know, we've put together this webinar series as a way of connecting people throughout this time, which is a little bit weird because we can't obviously just ask people advice where we normally might be able to and have conversations about things that we might just want a little bit of help with. So we're bringing together our network and sharing their expertise and knowledge with you all. And yeah, let's go from there. So firstly, Vivian, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vivian. Like Stacey said, I've been running Little Moons for 10 years now, and we started selling mochi to a lot of restaurants first, and then we started supplying retailers like Whole Foods, Ocado, Tesco's and Waitrose. But we've been massively affected by this COVID-19 situation and things. So I'm looking forward to sharing our stories with you.
And Chris, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm sorry that you can't see me, especially I've done my hair specially. That's not true, actually.
Did you shave it yourself? Is it super long?
It's starting to go a bit Peter Stringfellow, to be honest with you. But anyway, it's been looking at a look I've been going for a while. Anyway, so hello everyone. Yes, no, my name's Chris Naylor. I'm the Chief Executive of the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. For those of you who don't know where Barking and Dagenham is, it's the bit of the EastEnders map that people never quite get to at the end of the show. I've been the Chief Exec there now for just over 5 years. So if nothing else, things are definitely starting to be my fault. And a bit like Vivian, although I suspect in quite different ways, we've been, dramatically impacted by the COVID crisis, not least because in times of sort of national emergency, we become one of the fourth emergency services. So in addition to kind of running, stuff like emptying bins and things, we're called upon as part of the blue light services to kind of do certain things, which I'm happy to talk about as part of this.
Okay, and also you're going to be moving to Birmingham Council for a bit, aren't you?
I am, yes. So in the middle of May, I'm joining Birmingham City Council, which is the largest city council in Europe, actually, as their interim chief executive on a secondment for a year from May the 18th. Now, the question, so I'm using my words carefully here. I'm joining them on May the 18th. Whether I'm actually moving anywhere is a completely different matter. And it's certainly an interesting sort of sidebar question about how do you join a new organisation and make an impact and do all of those things you'd expect to do as a leader in an organisation when you can't physically be there, and when none of the people that you're wanting to kind of meet and introduce yourself to and form a relationship with, you can't physically see them either. It's that's my personal conundrum at the minute, and I'd be interested in what other people think about that.
Yeah, because last week, actually, we did recruitment and HR in the last one in this series. And one of the questions and the topics that kept coming up was about onboarding people remotely. And obviously, you're going to be onboarding, but as the leader, which is quite obviously it's kind of the same process, but to have to kind of go in and lead a new organisation remotely must be quite more challenging, obviously.
Yeah. Well, that's
interesting. We'll all follow that closely. So thank you everybody for sending. We've had so many questions and sent over ahead of this, so I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them, but we've tried to put them into a few categories so we can try and cover up as much as we can. Obviously, post stuff in the questions if you've got anything particularly you want asking, and we'll try our best to get through everything. So firstly, I guess let's sort of carry on from what we were just touching on, Chris. We could talk about how do you think you can effectively lead via remote channels?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And to some extent, I think it's, I would say don't overthink it, right? So, and in fact, I was talking to somebody about this morning, actually, in the context of joining Birmingham. I think if you start actually with the question, how do I do how do I do leadership? How do I motivate, inspire people? How do I ensure that people are feeling a degree of psychological safety, which I think is imperative these days for people to understand what's going on, what are the things that we're concentrating on, all those sorts of things that enable people to feel kind of grounded in an organization. If you start by asking and answering that question, then I think the point about whether or not you're doing it remotely or face to face is sort of secondary, actually. I think there are sort of a set of practical things you can do about sort of making sure that you're consciously checking in with people, and I think that can feel a bit sort of odd and contrived and, I don't know, a bit cheesy sometimes, actually, to tell people that how you're feeling, asking them how they're feeling. But I think other than that, my starting point would be sort of lead as you would lead, and take it from there.
Okay. And what about you, Vivian?
I completely agree. I think that you just continue leading people as you would lead them, but just be conscious that they are all working from home. And so I guess communication and the forms of communication are a lot more limited, so they can't just pop round to your desk. So you've got to make an effort to call them. I don't know what your team have agreed. So my wider team, I definitely speak to all of them in a big group chat once a week. All the guys that have been furloughed, on a Friday night, we'll have a fun social call just to see how everyone's weeks were going. We'll talk about what everyone's watching on Netflix, just so they still feel connected to the team, and it's nothing to do with work. And then I guess my direct reports, I just make sure that I check in with them, even if it's a quick phone call. There's times that I think we've all agreed at lunchtimes everyone can just dial in, just so that people feel connected, because I think a lot of people that are living alone feel quite isolated, and I think it's just making sure that you recreate a sort of working environment where they can sort of pop by your desk and feel supported at any time.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose that kind of leads us on to the next question, which was how have you got any advice for how to keep your teams motivated? And I guess that's the main thing you're trying to do, is recreate that environment of kind of meeting at the coffee machine.
So I've been really impressed with how hard my team have been working, because often if people are working from home, I think sometimes there's the impression they're not really working. But my team, I'm constantly getting emails. They're so engaged when I have calls with them. They're bringing issues, that I haven't thought about. So my team have been pretty motivated, but I think that's just because we've been a motivating team from before the lockdown. And I guess it's just to stay honest with them, so they know what's happening, and so there's as little uncertainty as possible. And I think that's why my team has stayed motivated. And I think if you keep the social side up, that everyone just still feels like they know what the plan is. I've been honest with them about what our plan is, and I constantly check in with them with the one-to-ones, and just like we normally manage people, just make sure that they're hitting their goals. They know what their priorities are for the week, and just keep close contact with them.
Yeah. And what are you doing, Chris?
I think there's a couple of things, and I agree with everything that Vivian's just said. There's a sort of two just reflections on it. So one is, I think there's a real danger, and certainly for the local authority right now. So we're in as I was saying earlier, there are certain obligations on us during a kind of period of crisis, which means we're effectively running a command structure at the minute. So which sounds rather grand, but essentially means a series of sort of structured meetings during the course of the day that escalate to a kind of gold meeting later, all that sort of stuff. And the reason why I'm saying all of that is because there's a very strong danger that we go into kind of like task leadership, if that makes sense. So a lot of this becomes quite kind of process heavy, task orientated, people really focused on getting specific things sorted. I don't know, getting PP to the right place, making sure our parks open or closed, all that sort of like crucial stuff. But we have to pay attention to how people are feeling and that sort of relationship management. So let me give you an example of that. Theoretically, we're now in the second week of the school Easter holidays, right? So for those of us with children, like we've sort of slightly lost the thread of like the normal kind of rhythm of the week and term time and holidays and things. An interesting sort of dynamic on that. I don't know if other parents are on the line, but that sort of feeling where your children kind of think it's like permanently the weekend and you're kind of like permanently the busiest you've ever been. It's sort of tricky how you manage that. Anyway, the point I'm rambling towards here is that I wrote to all my staff last Monday saying, if you booked leave over the Easter holidays, I'm expecting you to take it. And I didn't mean that in a kind of like a threatening way. It was just like, try to keep going as normal, because I think Vivian, your point, actually, people are really rallying around. They're working really hard. They're very committed to the organization's endeavors, and that might be kind of a moral thing because they're, I don't know, they're care workers or something, or it might just be they're super committed to the goals of your organization. And actually, what you need to say to people sometimes is stop, and put some boundaries around how you work and all those sorts of things. Because I think they're the things that, people will be fine until they're not fine. And when they're not fine, it will happen quite suddenly, I think. And we've all got, and I suspect we're probably a few days away from that for most people. So we've got to kind of, actively encourage people to, take the breaks and take the time out.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that there might be a lot of pressure for you to really, sit by your computer all day. But I have said to my team, you are working, so you're saving an hour of commute if they feel the need to work 8 hours a day. But we've given the Headspace app to every single person in our organization, and we've just sent out weekly newsletters, which are sort of mental health ones, just to check in with everyone and make sure they're okay, and making sure that they're meditating and doing some form of exercise, be it yoga and things like that. So I think you're completely right. It's not just about work, it's making sure that everyone's mentally healthy. And actually that's my priority at this time, because I don't actually have that much business stuff to do. Like, we can review our marketing plan for when this all opens up again, but there's nothing that's like business critical right now for me, because I've shut my factory down. So unlike you, I'm not crazy busy getting PPE to different places, but they're sort of like the long-term goals that we've been trying to, we've now got time to stop and think about. But you're right, mental health and just taking time for yourself is really important. And actually I feel so much better having switched off for 4 days entirely, because it was getting a bit stressful.
Yeah, I found as well, I was actually just saying to my partner, I'm really enjoying, if you're allowed to say that, part of this, the lockdown, like taking the time to cook a meal and actually make everything from scratch and actually sit and eat dinner together. Yeah. It's just I don't know, life is just so crazy all the time, actually taking that step back and being able to relax. And it's something I've been really encouraging my team to do as well. And we've kind of put in place this thing called the lockdown game. So everyone's got this little challenge that they have to do together each week, whether it's, make a cake, or this week we're doing wildlife photographer of the week, but then get everyone to come back together on a Friday with what they've done, and kind of, so it's fun, and we're going to have a little celebration at the end. I've done 10 weeks of challenges so far, so let's hope it doesn't go on for much longer than that. I was just going to say, actually, in case anybody's wondering, Vivian's dog's just come back from the vet, the poor little thing. So in case, if you wonder what Vivian's
my arm's doing, sorry, I can show everyone. I was working, but he's just lying here and he's just had his whole leg is shaved. He's just had major knee surgery, so I had to sit on the floor, otherwise he would just sit there whining. But that's why my arm's moving, because I'm stroking him.
Bless him. So I kind of think what would be next. I think what would be really interesting, actually, and one of the questions that came in was to look at what do you think it means for the future of future working arrangements? Because obviously everything has kind of turned on its head really quickly, and we've all had to adapt and change as quickly as we could. But that's also, I mean, it's not going to be as quick, the return to normality, or what the new normal is. But how are you going to effectively lead through that? Vivian, we'll start with you this time.
I'm really surprised with how effectively everyone is working from home. And so I think if there was a call for people to work from home more often, I'd be really open to that, having seen how everyone's done it together. But I know that my team are dying to come back to the office. So I don't know if they will want to work from home after this, but I totally see that you can be more flexible with working. And I think this completely proves it. I guess that would be my head office guys, my production guys, the guys who work in the factories actually making the little moons. I mean, I don't know, like we all had PPE anyway, strangely, because you're covering mochi, the ice cream in flour. So everyone has these masks. We already have all of these and everyone wears them. So I don't think there's that much. I guess we'll have to rely on government guidance if there's any, just to say they might keep a distance, like they might ask people to keep that distance in for longer, but I really don't know. I think for our pop-up, so we have some pick and mixes in Selfridges, Westfield, France, and a few places. It's open products, so we're thinking about perhaps wrapping it in a sort of vegetable. I can't remember. It's not plastic, but it's made from plant material. So I think we're going to have to rethink everything, because food will need to be crazy hygienic, and how you serve it. I think people will be a lot more sensitive to it for a lot longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about you, Chris? Because I think especially local authorities historically have all been really based at the town hall, and you go there to get, you know, quite paper based, I guess. So I think it's amazing how quickly you've all kind of moved that all to remote. But what do you think about moving forward, and especially for public service delivery, I guess?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things really. So the first, I suppose, is that we are bloody lucky that this happened now and not sort of 7 years ago, right? I think had it done so, it'd have been a different story altogether. And you know, one of the weird things about austerity, I mean, just for folk who aren't from a local government background, most councils have had their core funding from government cut by 62% since 2010. So we're spending roughly half at the end of the decade what we were at the start, though with no kind of reduction in what we need to kind of do. So to some extent, this has been, you know, a bit of in the planning is sort of how we rationalize space and have people working from home and those sorts of things. But I think there's sort of three quick learning points from it. The first is it's remarkable how quickly you can do things when you need to do them really quickly, right? I know that sounds like a truism, but but people who work with me know that I've got Chris's theory of packing. Theory of packing is that packing takes as long as you've got. So if you give yourself 2 weeks to pack for your holiday, it'll take 2 weeks. If you give yourself 20 minutes, it'll take 20 minutes. I mean, obviously, if you give yourself 5 minutes, that's when you completely screw up and leave your passport at home. But the example I'm going to give you is that we virtualized our contact center in 9 days. So we went from having a contact center where people had to physically come into an office and got it so it was people could work from home in 9 days. I think in any other context, that would have been, you know, the program architecture we'd have put around that, the sort of, you know, all of that sort of stuff, it would have been months, right? And tens of thousands of pounds. So I'm not entirely sort of suggesting that we kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater with all of that one, but I do think we need to kind of capture what has made us agile and make sure that we then apply that in other sort of spheres. So those are the two things, and these are going to sound a little bit like I'm sort of going to start throwing scatter cushions at people, but I do think there's something about, and it's a sort of fairly obvious point which other people are making, but one that I think we in government need to take back in, which is this real point about we're starting to value people we haven't valued for a long time, right? And certainly, you know, if I think about my business at the moment, the people who are in are refuse collectors, care workers, you know, kitchen assistants, those sorts of things. And we've probably spent the last 10 years working out how we kind of sweat productivity out of them, which I think for a lot of people has meant just sort of paying them less, right? So how we kind of think about that workforce differently, I think, is incredibly important. And to related to that, it's about how we value different patterns of working. So if I think about my corporate management team, it's 50-50 male, female. And for the first time in my working career, and I've been sort of doing this now for 25 years, it's the men in the office who are dashing around doing the childcare. And that's simply a kind of a product of how old they are, but also sort of our ethos as an organization. I guess the point I'm rambling towards here is that sort of how people work, where they work, how they are productive, what we understand as productivity in the workplace are all things that I think this crisis has thrown into sharp relief. There's a lot of myths around that sort of stuff, and hopefully we can sort of use this as an opportunity to kind of kill off some of those.
And what kind of, how are you guys staying positive? Is it because your teams are doing such great work, or is there any other kind of nuggets of wisdom that you can share with the rest of us?
Well, I think you need to keep. So I think there's a very interesting sort of question about how you reward people and say thank you in the context where you're not seeing them all the time, right? So when you pop into the office and you're there and you're present and you're wandering around and you're doing your thing, it's very easy to kind of give off. I'm not talking now about sort of massive thanks, bouquets of flowers, or bonuses or anything like that, but just the small little acknowledgements of reward and thanks and praise. And so I think to some extent you just have to consciously do that. And as I said earlier on, there is something sort of slightly, it can sort of feel slightly forced and weird, but it is very much appreciated, that sort of message to people. And then I think the other thing is just keep telling the story of why what we do is important, and the individual contributions that people are making, and be prepared to sort of engage with them about what they're worried about, rather than just pretending. I mean, it's doing my head in, frankly, being at home all the time and trying to juggle various things. And I've been fairly open and honest with my staff about that. And, they've come back and said, oh, thank God you said it, because they're feeling exactly the same. So I think sort of being on the journey with them and telling the story of what's happening and how we're all feeling about it and top tips and all that sort of stuff. But I think Vivian said right at the very start of this, communicate. And you're just having to do it in slightly different ways.
Yeah. Have you got anything to add to that, Vivian?
No, the same. I think, empathy with people to make sure that, if you share that there are difficulties, we are all in this together. And I think that helps people when, to feel more positive, that they're not the only ones who may be feeling a little bit down about things. And I always remind them about all the great things that, our business is a great business and it will be fine when this is all over. Like, all of this shutting a factory has got nothing to do with us. And so whoever's feeling a bit down in my business, to remind them it wasn't something that they've done wrong or anything. But I think some people need a little bit more encouragement with that than others. I'm naturally quite a positive person anyway, so it's just good to talk to everyone and just make sure they're feeling good.
Yeah. I was just going to, something that came up there in your answer, Chris, and especially talking about what Vivian said about communication and about being prepared to engage with people and not pretend this isn't happening, actually encourage people to talk about it. Have either of you encountered any individuals or people that have actually been quite difficult about that and being a bit almost troublemakery, and how have you dealt with that? Vivian, yeah, there we go.
I took the decision quite early on that we were going to shut our factory when all of our head office staff could work from home. For safety, I couldn't. Why would the factory guys have to come to work too? So we everyone's equal, and we shut that down. So we didn't have any difficulty, because I did hear some people worried, like in operations, they can't work from home, and are we going to continue asking them to come in on public transport? And they were really worried early on, and this was before the furloughing announcement came out. And so I heard that, we thought about it, then the furlough announcement came out, and it totally made sense. It was such a good decision. And we just had a big factory meeting and said, guys, everyone's going to be at home, health first. And there was no difficulty about that. We did the right thing. Everyone agreed that we made the right decision. And I think everyone's really grateful for it, because I think some of the people that they're living with, they are still working in care homes and they have to still go to work because it's an essential service. And so they really appreciate and recognize the fact that they can now stay at home and not have to come to work because we're not essential.
So interesting enough, I don't think I've had anyone who's been like specifically awkward. And I've worked in some fairly crackers places where people have been specifically awkward, so I sort of know what it looks like. But I think if anything, I think as Vivian was saying, the decision of government to say, right, this is it now, stop, was quite helpful for some of those people who I think were still struggling with the concept of being able to lead and not being present. Right. So I was still having, a bit like you, Vivian, I was quite categoric early, that sort of, I'm trying to remember the exact week it was, but essentially the sort of week to 10 days before the lockdown, when government was sort of basically hinting very strongly that you should not be traveling, you should not be doing these sorts of things. I had to be pretty categoric that, we were basically going to close the town hall and that people should go home. And that included with politicians who are really struggling with the concept of leadership while not being visible. And then I think everyone else has sort of have had sort of valid questions, I think, rather which if you were sort of so minded to see them as being awkward, you could do. But actually, I think were genuine questions about, if you've got sort of 4 refuse workers in a cab, how do they keep 2 meters apart? Interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the answer to that is PPE, but we haven't got any. So what we're going to do about it? And you quickly get into sort of problem-solving mode of, people in literally cars following the van round and that sort of thing. But so I think it was much more about sort of people with genuine questions and challenges rather than sort of arms folded, we're not doing it. And I do think we've had a good partnership with our trade unions during this period, and they've been positive and helpful and in problem solving mode rather than problem finding mode, which has been good.
That's good. So I was just going to ask, one of the questions we had come through as well was how do you respond to a team when they ask questions when no clear answers exist? And you've kind of just touched on that about problem solving, but is there anything else either of you would add to that?
I think it's just be honest, because when I gave the speech to the team about furlough, like there were so many details that that weren't clear yet. Was holiday going to be covered? All I knew is that the government was going to cover 80%, and I'm going to be paying this for 2 months before the portals even open at the end of April to start claiming the money. So I've got to manage that in my own cash flow. But I just needed the staff to know that they would get paid every Tuesday like they do each week, and they don't have to worry about it. And then tell them that what I'm not sure of, but we'll work it out, and all those details will come. And so I'm always very honest with my team, and so I feel like it's a good trust there that we'll do our best to take care of them. And I think it's just honesty. If you've always been honest and people trust you, then if you're truthful about the unknowns, then what can you do? Yeah.
I agree with that. I don't think I've got much to add to it, really. Just, I think being clear. So sometimes you do know, and you just need to tell people, and they haven't heard it or clocked it. And I'm always surprised at how many times I've said something and people still then sort of go, but I don't know what's happening. So there's just repeat. And then when you don't know, then we don't know. I mean, there's lots of things we've been dealing with over the last sort of 10 years or so where I've no idea what's happening, but all you can do is like, well, this much we do know. So until otherwise, we're going to crack on like this, and you impose some direction on it. Yeah.
Everything keeps changing so quickly as well. There's new announcements like every day nearly. So, no one can be completely on top of it, but definitely with you about communication and honesty. We've got a question coming here that's interesting. Do you think employees' wellbeing will move up the agenda? This obviously situation has made us see people's flexibility, and should we therefore take better care of them and more than just a thank you? Chris, do you want to start on that?
Yes, I think the answer to that question is yes. I think it's worth unpacking what we mean by sort of people's well-being. And we probably haven't got time to kind of unlock all of that now. But I think the sort of trot off to occupational health probably isn't sufficient. And so I think a lot of the messages around making sure that you're taking exercise and all of that sort of stuff, how we apply that in the workplace, I think is important. But I still come back to this point about there's something for me about sort of workforce productivity and workplace equalities, and the extent to which the way we're working now can provide the basis for thinking very differently about how people balance work and home life, caring responsibilities, non-caring responsibilities, and how that is distributed across the sexes in different ways quite often, and how in a sense we become much more conscious of that. It just connects back to what I was saying about what we value, and I've witnessed it throughout my career. People leaving early to do the school run, or getting in late because they've done the school run, and the sort of the rolling of the eyes and all that sort of stuff that goes with that. And I think now's a moment for us all to kind of acknowledge the value of what is quite often unpaid labour behind the scenes, and making sure that we're as accommodating of that as possible. And really thinking that as part of the kind of employment package, really. So that's my thoughts on that.
What about you, Vivian?
In our company, I've worked in places where employees haven't been valued, so I've learnt very much. I've experienced how I don't want to be managed. So I'd like to say we're really caring of our employees. Like everyone's already got access to vitamins and fresh fruit every day. I can do flexible working for a lot of mothers with kids, like part-time working. We're super flexible. I'm a small company. I can accommodate all of that. Whereas I know that might be harder in larger organizations and things. So it hasn't made me value my employees anymore. I've always really valued them. But what it's made me, and I hope that society will value nurses more, carers more, like you said, your refuge workers, like the people who are now suddenly essential. They are essential, and not to politicize it, but some people are called unskilled workers who are paid below 25,000, whereas I think a lot of nurses and carers are paid below that. They're not unskilled. They need to be taken care of.
Yeah, definitely. I think that really good point. And Charlotte's actually just sent in again saying that it sounds like you've both treated your employees really well. But how will you both, as leaders, I know I'm quite passionate about this, but how would you feel about working with organisations, big or small, who have not been good to their employees during this period? Because there's been a lot of publicity about people doing amazing stuff, but there's also been lots about some organisations that have been really crappy, to be honest. We've got a couple of minutes left, Vivian. How do you feel about that?
I don't know, but generally, I was just speaking to my husband about it. Amazon doesn't sound like they treat their staff that well. Hear all the stuff that comes out of the warehouse. We're actively trying not to buy as much stuff on Amazon. As a consumer, that means a lot to me. In terms of my business and stuff, I haven't heard anything so far, but I think it will be noted, and I think employees should definitely note and ask that question, how did you treat your staff during the COVID-19 pandemic? I think it is really important how, when you're looking for a job, you should definitely look into that side of business and how they value their employees. As a consumer, it make a massive difference to me.
And what about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, actually, and I'd like to go away and reflect on it. I mean, I suppose what's been interesting, I think, generally about this crisis is that it has both thrown into sharp relief a set of things that have been bubbling away behind the scenes for a while, that people have been sort of conscious of and aware of. I don't know, for example, valuing carers, supporting flexible working and family, those sorts of things. But also, I think increasingly, certainly from a government perspective, sort of how we use the purchasing power that we have. I mean, my organisation spends £750 million a year, right? We can do a lot of harm and good with that money. And so the sort of social value and the social impact of how we spend and those sorts of decisions, how we are encouraging the right behaviours through how we buy stuff, I think is a big question. And I think I will come back to this point about how we're valuing people and this sense of I think, again, without wanting to politicize at this point, about how we kind of build social and economic resilience through what we do. And you might well be able to get that cleaning contract for sort of 7% cheaper by buying it from that firm, but when the proverbial hits the fan, where is the sort of social infrastructure that is the unseen social infrastructure that company is relying upon when things go wrong? Will they be there? Will they be part of the solution or part of the problem when the next thing hits? And I think they are questions that we're going to want to be asking, both as an organisation and as a society moving forward.
That's brilliant. Thank you both. We've come to the end of the webinar, the end of our time. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you Vivian and Chris for being so inspirational and letting us have such an insight. Unfortunately, everybody didn't get to see Chris in the living room, but there'll be other opportunities to have you back again. And please tune into our other webinars. Next week, we're talking about technology and how you can use that to better deliver your services and your business. And the week after that, we're doing health and wellbeing. So lots of interesting topics coming up. Thank you, everybody. And we'll hopefully speak to you all again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.